Old Recoil was so much fun. Whether you're new to Rust or an OG player with thousands of hours, you can't deny the fact that Rust's old recoil system was a unique experience that you couldn't find anywhere else. It was like going to the only pizza joint in your city that sells pineapple on pizza. It was polarizing. It was exciting, and you either loved or you hated it. This is a letter to the Rust developers and an homage to OG Rust players, and hopefully a compromise between new and old survivors of the wasteland. Toasty and I want to thank each and every one of you who attended our last chit chat. Toasty is very much an extrovert, and any attention he gets makes him spin with joy. Right, Toasty? These cabin talks seem to be very popular with our guests, and we're going to continue them, and Toasty and I have quite a lot to say about different topics. So, if there's something you guys want us to talk about, or an idea you have for Rust and its future, leave it down below. Leave it in a little note, and me and Toasty will read it. Now, the thing I want to talk about today is the old recoil system. The thing about the old recoil system is that it seemed to be more of a bug than a feature at the time. Nowhere in the developer updates would you find a guide or a tutorial that explained how it worked. It was something that you had to try out once you're able to find a gun in the game. Being that Rust is a hardcore survival game, finding a gun is already a difficult task. There's no easily accessible buy menu where you can just purchase a gun. There's no respawn function that allows you to keep your items after death. It's a brutal world with a small chance of encountering any form of substantial loot. And this narrative of the game is the reason why so many players have only recently picked up the game. With the many changes over the past couple years, Rust has only just become a game where you didn't need to worry about the harsh punishment the game likes to dish out. But has this been what the game needs? Rust in the early days was very much optimized for the hardcore gamer. A player who is willing and able to play the game for multiple hours in a row, and a player who had the willpower to push through the setbacks that the Rust experience was sure to come with. In one of Rust updates, one of these setbacks was to define the player base and really separate the hardcores from the casuals. The addition of the AK. And along with it, its staple recoil pattern. The sound of the AK alone was enough to scare even the most experienced FPS players. It sounded like an absolute machine. I've got some footage I want you to see. To you, this footage might be a reel of an old world that no longer exists. Shoot, to some, this might be looking at a crashed plane footage from the 60s. But to me, to Toasty, and to many others, this is like looking at yearbooks from your middle school class. This is like looking at photos of you and your childhood best friend.
I just like to say that is way harder than Counter-Strike. Fact. Factual information. Way harder than CS.
The AK's recoil created a huge gap between the casual Rust enjoyers and the best of the best PvPers that would ever don FPS games. It was such a profound mechanic that even other players of other FPS games would hold Rust players in high regards. And it was well understood. It made sense. Rust had always been a hardcore game, and if you weren't putting in the time to learn the recoil system, you weren't going to survive in the wasteland. And for a hardcore survival game, that made sense. If the real world was to fall into chaos today, the people who had prepared for it would obviously outlive and dominate. That's just what makes sense. But recently, things haven't made sense. Like many other games today, the development of great experiences isn't as highly valued as it once was. The exclusion of diehard fans for wider reach and the expansion of profitable margins is destroying the landscape of games. Rust's 2022 recoil change is one of these moments in gaming that represents a big problem we can all relate to. Rust, like many other previously successful games, started with a small audience of very dedicated players, and over time, that small audience would eventually grow to thousands. But the shifts in perspective of developers and this push for faster growth of sales and player base and sometimes clout makes these once loved mechanics, features, and experiences less and less accessible. It's sad to see, man. It's really sad to see. At one time, I remember I would actually spend multiple days, even weeks in the wasteland. I remember sinking a whole week into a wipe, just to get to the point where I could raid my neighbors. Today, Rust does not require such time investment. It does not require multiple sessions of progression, learning, or battling with the opposing players to dominate your area of the map and stake your claim as a champion of the wasteland. It's not really something that anyone aims for anymore. You no longer need to experience the punishing nature of learning a recoil pattern in order to prove your worth as a survivor. The quote-unquote hardcore nature of Rust is no more. Bases are built to maximize resource expenditure in raiding situations. Crafting and loot-based progression systems are now replaced with tech tree advancements, and worst of all, the king of king, top of the shit mound of a mountain changes to Rust. Recoil patterns have been sacrificed at the altar for a variation of linear weapon kicks and aim cone. Guys, it's called Bloom, okay? Stop trying to cover up the word by calling it aim cone. It's literally a weapon bloom. Just like a shotgun with its spread mechanic. Every weapon now has a built-in weapon bloom. It's so weird. In first-person, hardcore, survival shooters, we have weapon bloom. Can you believe that, Toasty? Me neither. Well, I'm gonna be honest, I can believe it. I can understand why developers would add it into the game, but I still don't like it. What once made Rust what it was no longer exists. Imagine if you took the pickaxe out of Minecraft and replaced it with a jackhammer. Imagine if you took the armor and weapons out of World of Warcraft and replaced it with bomb disposal suits and rocket launchers. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think it'd be cool, but I don't think the game would be better for it. It's inconsistent with the game design, with the game lore. Imagine if you took Ryu and Ken out of Street Fighter and replaced them with actual Superman. Sure, these games would be much more approachable by the casual audience. Sure, it might get some cool points, but then you take away that which makes them great. You take away that moment that makes them grow into something unique and worth coming back to for 5 or 10 years. You take away the good times, the times of farming obsidian to make your first nether portal, the times of doing dungeons to get the piece of armor that makes you look cooler than all of your guildmates, the times of practicing that combo that annihilates your best friend during the holiday break, the times where you learn recoil pattern and dominate your side of the map, the times that make you feel like you're in the wasteland, the good times. You took those away. Now, a couple of positive things you could consider is that Rust has the capability of becoming a balanced game, and it has the ability to offer the options for these kind of systems to exist. It has the ability for the community to have multiple variations and choices of how they want to play the game. It has that ability. We have servers where decay rate is cut in half. We have servers where resources spawn more frequently. We have servers where, shoot, even PvP is completely disabled if that's your kind of thing. And me and Toasty would like to express some of our thoughts and our opinions on how we can fix things going forward and how me and Toasty would like to see this wasteland be welcoming to an even wider range of players and make it more, what's the word, Toasty? Capable of catering to a wider range of players in the way that the developers probably intended it to be. Now, I understand how the new updates, especially the ones recently, were supposed to change Rust and were supposed to invite in new players and old players alike, but I don't think they've done that. And some of the ideas that I have, I think could really make a difference in the way that we handle getting new players into the wasteland. There's a whole section that's not even really considered amongst most players, and that's the modded servers. Most players don't play on modded servers. They either play on community servers or on Facepunch's own official servers. If Facepunch was to deliver the ability for modders to create special experiences, catered experiences to a specific audience, then I feel like Rust could have many more years of replayability, just like these games that are continuing on past their prime years. That's just one of the ideas that I have, but I want to know what you guys think. Do you guys have any ideas as to how we can fix things going forward? Because at the moment, Rust is, very obviously, not catering to a wide enough range of players and is actively pushing out the players that made the game what it once was. If you have a unique idea, or maybe something simple that the developers could implement into the game, whether it be a new framework, a new feature, a new mechanic, a new item, let us know down below, leave us a note, and then me and Toasty will review some of them, and we can all talk about these ideas together, because ultimately, that's what me and Toasty's goal is for us, is to create an environment where we can all discuss and compile ideas, and hopefully, like I said before, create a compromise between new and old players, because the way things are going right now, there's a very big divide that separates older and newer players, especially on the emotional front. And Rust was not made to be an emotional battlefield. It's a physical one. Get loot, build a base, and raid other people. The good stuff. So again, whether you have a note that agrees or disagrees with me, whether it's good or bad, your feedback is very much appreciated, and all ideas are welcome, no matter how abstract they may appear. For my own personal taste, I believe that Rust's difficult nature is what made it so renowned amongst our corner of the internet. It's not like other games, where the difficulty doesn't really determine whether or not that game is a successful game or not, but Rust is a little different. When you think of Rust for what Rust is, Rust at its very core mechanics and very core fundamentals is a hardcore survival shooter game. Meaning the elements that make up those frameworks and the more difficult they become really set the impression that this really is a hard game to play, and that is part of what makes it fun. Let's take another game, for example, where the difficulty is very much relevant to the game's success, and that would be Dark Souls. And even more recently, Elden Ring. Imagine if every Elden Ring boss that you ever went up against was one-shottable, was so easy to dodge that your armor and your weapon no longer mattered. Imagine if the bosses were so weak and so slow that no matter what gear you had, as long as it was decent, was good enough to take on the majority of the content in the game. Rust is very much in a similar boat, no pun intended, where even early game weapons can become viable if you're at a close enough range. Even the custom SMG, which is very much a common gun if you compare it to the drop rates of other guns, is just as viable as an AK at close ranges. Now, you might be thinking, but Sorbet, that's because it's an SMG, of course it's good at close ranges. Yeah, well, we also have the MP5. The MP5 is pretty much the same gun as the custom SMG at close ranges, right? The majority of players who are out in the wasteland right now are not trying to shoot each other in the head, especially at close ranges. They're aiming for the body, they're letting lead fly, and they're letting the time to kill of their weapon be the thing that carries them to their victory. Now imagine if Dark Souls was like that. Imagine if the sword that you got 3 hours into the game and the armor that you got 6 hours into the game was more than enough to take on all the bosses all the way up until the very end game. Rust is very much in a similar position to that example. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't seek to find balance, but again, in my very much experienced time in the wasteland, I would say that the old recoil system was better for the game if you consider that the game is a hardcore game. If you consider it to be a casual game, then don't mind what I just said. If you consider it to be a casual game, then of course you're going to say that the way it stands now is better for the game. But I'll always come back to dispute that idea that Rust is not in itself a casual game. If all players were to leave the game right now, and there were to be no players on any of the servers, all the islands were empty, Rust would be considered a hardcore game. At least, that's the idea, and that's what it's supposed to be. I can see how some players might say that the recoil pattern of the old times were unnecessary. I can understand that. Considering that most players don't spend more than a few hours in a single session, I can understand them. I can understand that most players don't want to learn a recoil pattern. But, at the end of the day, Rust was made for hardcore players. And I'm going to go into detail about this later in another chit chat. And I'm going to go in depth to show why Rust was meant to be hardcore and how the other features and mechanics of the game lean towards a hardcore player experience. And some of you you're actually not going to recognize some of the points that I might be talking about, even hearing about it right now. If I told you that I was going to be talking about how Rust was made for hardcore players, you probably couldn't even guess what are some of the things that I'm going to be talking about in that chit chat. Because some of the things I'm going to talk about are features that most players, they look over. Most players, they don't even consider these small aspects about the game that make it a hardcore game. But that's all from me and Toasty today. We're signing off. It's the start of Wipe, and we're gonna go see if we can kill some nakeds. Thank you for bringing guests in our cabin. We hope you'll come back for our next chit chat. Stay frosty!